Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening. Thank you for tuning into Generation Z's KRAKEN News Report number 229. This is Riel doing the reporting today, and this will probably be the longest KRAKEN that we have done. I know that the audience is used to a certain length and pace. However, there is simply so much to report on. I think our audience deserves the longer episode today, especially given that it was a long weekend and we hadn't been reporting consistently for the weeks leading up to my first take at this last week. And so sorry, Marius from New Zealand. I know you prefer shorter ones, but that is why I'll be covering the main heavy hitting stories in the first 20 minutes. And today's report is actually going to be compartmentalized. So I've got it in sections, actually. First is the big stories from my own subjective perspective of what is relevant and what people should be aware of in the mainstream news. Then stories related to Canada Day and 4th of July, followed by global economic and finance. Then we're going to be hitting the disturbing section of the global conflict reports, which unfortunately there is a lot of to report on. And this will be followed by the global stories that are interesting and not disturbing, and probably lesser known to the average news consumer. Then we're going to have a COVID section. And lastly, if you stick around to the end, you'll get an interesting surprise of a story that I guarantee any person interested in the regular Gen Z content is going to appreciate. So without further ado, let's get to it. And I'm just sharing my screen to start. And first thing we're looking at today is, so today, July 4th, 2022, the Large Hadron Collider is ready to once again start delivering proton collisions to experiments, this time at an unprecedented energy of 13.6 TeV, marking the start of the accelerator's third run of data taking for physics. So this is pretty big news. There's a lot of different angles to go in at this. We're not going to do that here, but I guarantee you we're going to be covering this in either the private side on Patreon or the public side on YouTube. We'll see though. But TeV stands for 13.6 trillion electron volts. And just because not everybody knows about the Higgs boson collider, we will actually just read one paragraph from here to give us a bit of an understanding of what they're trying to do. So the article says that the Heavy Ion Collision Program will allow the investigation of quark gluon plasma, or QGP, a state of matter that existed in the first 10 microseconds after the Big Bang, with unprecedented accuracy. The quote is, "We expect to be moving from a phase where we observed many interesting properties of the quark gluon plasma to a phase in which we precisely quantify those properties and connect them to the dynamics of its constituents," says Luciana Musa, spokesperson of the ALICE collaboration. In addition to the main lead runs, a short period with oxygen collisions will be included for the first time, with the goal of exploring the emergence of QGP-like FX in a small colliding system. So definitely stay tuned. This is going to be activated on July 5th. So for me at the time of my recording, this will be happening tomorrow. It will be recorded, actually, so you can watch it live, as this related article on the website here says, watch the launch of Run 3 live on CERN's website. So very interesting there. Next up, we've got from Reuters.com, we're looking at Italy declaring a state of emergency over the drought-stricken north. And in this article, we see that Italy on Monday, which is today, July 4th, declared a state of emergency for areas surrounding the River Po, which accounts for roughly a third of the country's agricultural production and is suffering its worst drought for 70 years. The government decree will allow authorities to cut through red tape and take action immediately if they think if necessary, such as to impose water rationing for homes and businesses. The obvious parallel to draw here is with what has been going on in Canada, which we will be touching on a little bit in the Canadian segment. But very important to recognize that the states of emergencies are a part of what is called continuity of government. So If you're unfamiliar with that, we can definitely cover that in later episodes of non-Kraken segments, but that's not what we're doing here today. We're just letting you know that Italy is now in a state of emergency, and they are saying that they can impose water rations for homes and businesses. Next up, we have the Intercept, which is a reputed journalistic outlet, less so of the mainstream news that's corporatized, but this is more about the actual journalists doing the reporting. And the article is How the Pentagon Uses a Secretive Program to Wage Proxy Wars. The exclusive documents and interviews reveal the sweeping scope of classified 127E operations. Now, honestly, this could be its own episode that we go into. But what I wanted to bring up with this is that the quote is on this article: small teams of U.S. Special Operations Forces are involved in a low-profile proxy war program on a far greater scale than previously known, according to exclusive documents and interviews with more than a dozen current and former government officials. So this is nothing new. Everybody knows that the United States and NATO and all these other countries have military programs in countries all around the world. However, here we can see the graph where it actually shows the current and former 127E programs, as well as a comparison of total numbers of 127E programs in 2020. So feel free to pause the video, look at the map. Definitely recommend you look this article up on the Intercept, looking up the Pentagon 127E proxy wars. Very fascinating, and there's a lot to get into with that, but we're simply just telling you that this is what has been reported this week. Next up, from the Intercept as well, is that the Pentagon explores using SpaceX for rocket-deployed quick reaction force. The U.S. Transportation Command hopes Elon Musk's SpaceX rockets could prevent the next Benghazi. I mean, is this really that much of a surprise to anybody who's been paying attention to Elon Musk and all of the technology that he's been producing? You know, it is definitely unfortunate to see that an engineer is being, their work is being used for war and weapons, but honestly, that's not really much of a surprise. Again, I definitely recommend our audience to go read this article for yourself, because there's a lot of information in here. And we have too much to cover to go into this, but we for sure will be referencing this in future episodes. Next up, we're going to Al Jazeera. And here we have environmental groups press leaders as the UN Ocean Conference ends. So as the 5-day conference comes to an end, several NGOs urge leaders to keep pledges made to save the world's seas. So this is under the category of climate crisis. This is from July 1st. This article I am bringing to our attention, and I don't mean to bring this me as such an individual, but we are bringing this to our audience's attention here because this happened the same week that Ghislaine Maxwell first got put on suicide watch, secondly got sentenced to 20 years in jail, and thirdly, we know that she has a history of speaking at the UN to promote protecting the world's oceans through her project Terramar. And that's really all I'm going to get into with this article, but just keep that in mind as we see that there was a UN conference about oceans the same week that she got sentenced. So what is going on behind the scenes there? Just something to think about. Next up, we're going to a website, euroweeklynews.com. The headline says, English actress given unrestricted access to Buckingham Palace through relationship with Prince Andrew. English actress Ghislaine Maxwell was given unrestricted access to Buckingham Palace through her relationship with Prince Andrew, claims a former royal officer. Interesting. So this was why I talked about that article first, followed by this one, because reminder as well about Prince Andrew. And please go check out the video where Dave is analyzing the interview with Prince Andrew, where he's being asked about his relationship with Jeffrey Epstein and Ghislaine Maxwell. So just very interesting. And of course, this is only a source from a royal guard. It's not formal official news, but still interesting to keep in mind and probably not a surprise to anybody following along with this saga. We're sticking with Al Jazeera here, and the White House releases a list of 17 people, both living and deceased, who will receive the Presidential Medal of Freedom. Simone Biles, Steve Jobs to receive highest U.S. civilian honor. So this was from July 1st, and the White House announced that President Joe Biden will present 17 people with the Presidential Medal of Freedom, the nation's highest civilian honor. So at first glance, there's a few things I want to bring up here. Number 17, which letter of the alphabet does that represent? Just interesting to put that to think about as to why they would choose certain people. Now, the individual that I want to focus on here, a very unfortunate and disturbing story, is Simone Biles, who is the most decorated U.S. gymnast in history, who has spoken out about issues such as sexual abuse. So she was a gymnast that had unfortunately been abused along with hundreds of other young gymnasts by a specific doctor with the American gymnast team. And I genuinely do wonder if that is going to be brought up at all at the White House and how they're going to handle it and what the angle is there. As you can even see, if you're watching this video, that an article connected to this one is Simone Biles blasts USA gymnastics and the FBI for allowing sex abuse. So just keep that in mind. But oh, interesting is that other people who are being awarded, John McCain, Denzel Washington, interesting, Sandra Lindsay, and Megan Rapinoe. Okay, interesting. Well, I honestly don't know many of these other people, but we will move on to the next article. But so just keep that in mind and we'll see how that happens. Oh, yes. And one more thing is that they will be presenting this on July 7th. So the date of that actually will be 0707 because it's July 7th, and they'll be presenting 17 people the award. That's just some interesting numbers that might reflect a deeper meaning about what's going on. Next up, we're going to the BBC, where from 3 days ago, North Korea claims COVID arrived on, quote, alien things near border. Now for YouTube, I'm reading an article from the CBC. This is literally the words on the screen. These are not my opinions or thoughts. This is what the BBC is reporting. So the article says that North Korea's COVID outbreak began with citizens touching, quote, alien things that had fallen near its South Korea border, state media in Pyongyang has claimed. Okay, now that is just a very interesting choice of words or interesting translation. Of course, the quote here from the investigation says that the people in the country are instructed to, quote, vigilantly deal with alien things coming by wind and other climate phenomena and balloons in the areas along the demarcation line and borders. So clearly the headline is meant to grab our attention and plucking some specific words of choice by the investigators. But nonetheless, the fact that that is the article just kind of is towing the line, we could say, with the push of narrative of the ET agenda that's going on. And for those that I did my dose of reality, actually, we were looking into the idea that there is a bigger agenda afoot with the Great Reset and the pandemic narrative coinciding with the ET disclosure push. And I'm very happy with my work there. It's available on the Patreon side of things at Generation Z/Patreon. I encourage you to check that out. I'll probably be bringing some of these ideas more public in the near future. But for now, we're keeping it on the Patreon side because it is a little sensitive. Next up, we've got Al Jazeera. Dutch farmers block food warehouses over new environmental rules. Fishers block ports in a show of support for farmers who blockaded supermarket distribution centers over new rules. So interesting here that the farmers are sticking up for themselves. Is this similar to what we saw in India with the farmers having mass protests? Farmers in the Netherlands have blockaded supermarket distribution centers in continuing protests against new environmental rules on nitrogen emissions that are likely to put many of them out of business. Interesting. So that is a side of the push for sustainable development and UN 2030, the Sustainable Development Goals, the zero carbon emission targets. This is a side of things that we're not really hearing about. And here we have the farmers that are producing the food are upset with these laws that are coming into place. So we'll stay tuned with that. Obviously, we also know in America of all of these factories where they produce food that are being set on fire. We know about Monsanto creating the monocrops. So just interesting to see the Dutch farmers protesting. And I think rightfully so. People should be allowed to protest as long as nobody's causing harm or damaging other people. But we will see what goes on there. And we'll see how the Dutch government responds, because we saw how the Canadian government responded to the truckers in Canada. We're going to stick with Al Jazeera, and the article here is the European Union to set up platform for Ukraine war reconstruction. Ukraine says it needs $750 billion for a three-stage recovery plan in the wake of Russia's invasion. $750 billion. Is that in addition to all of the tens of billions of dollars that they've already been sent by other countries from the West? And without reading more into this article, all I really want to say is build back better. That's seems to be right on track, right? They held a Ukraine recovery conference in the southern Swiss city of Lugano, where the platform from the European Union, set up by European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen, says that the platform will be used to map investment needs, coordinate action, and channel resources. Since the beginning of the war, the European Union has mobilized around 6.2 billion euros in financial support, and more will come. Right. Well, that's all we need to read about that, but remember the triple Bs. Build back better. Next up, we're going to, this is one of our, so this is for those that wanted a concentration of the bigger stories for that's going on in the world over the past few days. This is the last one in that category. So feel free, if you've had your fill, I totally understand. But if you are interested in continuing, well, I've still got a lot more stories to cover. So thank you very much for being with us. This story is it's from CTV News. Switzerland called a, quote, safe haven for Russian oligarchs. So from Lugano, Switzerland, a leading Swiss non-governmental group on Monday called out Switzerland as a safe haven for Russian oligarchs and as a trading hub for Russian oil, grain, and coal. Public Eye, so it's called Public Eye, called on the Swiss executive branch to, quote, use all levers at its disposal to stop the financing of this inhuman aggression. Right. So given that we just looked at the article talking about the $750 billion that is going to be going into restructuring Ukraine, the next article we're looking at, which is this one, is talking about a non-governmental group calling out the Russian oligarchs for financing their inhuman aggression against Ukraine. And I have a feeling that Switzerland is not just a safe haven for Russian oligarchs, but probably they're a safe haven for all the oligarchs. We could for sure do a deep dive into the how Switzerland is involved with all of the world affairs. And we could go into the history of Switzerland and where its name comes from, but we're not going to be doing that today. We're just telling you that this is what they're reporting in the news. However, if you have the visual component of this video, I would love for you to look at this flag on this picture that they're using, because this flag is coming up later on at the end of the episode for a surprise story that I think will help maybe connect a few dots about what's going on behind the scenes, and just it's a bit of an esoteric representation of what's going on, but just keep that in mind. So I can describe it for those that are listening only on audio, actually. So it is the emblem of the Russian Federation, I believe, or it's also the German Republic. So it's the double-headed eagle or double-headed phoenix. Each eagle has a crown on its head, and they are connecting to a larger crown in the middle of them. And then there is, in one talon, it's holding a scepter, and in the other talon, it's holding an orb with a cross. And in the middle of this phoenix, there is a flag with a man on a horse slaying a dragon. So there's a lot there, I know, but just keep that in mind for our later articles. Okay, so happy 4th of July and happy Canada Day. We're getting now to the more specific stories that are maybe a little less known, but I'm choosing to share this with our audience because I think that you will appreciate it. So this story is from July 2nd, and it's from CBC, the Canadian Broadcasting Corporation. And I honestly, I laughed a little bit at this. So the headline is, "The Canadian American officials optimistic on democracy despite concerning cocktail of threats. Societal challenges require renewed effort, senior politicians say." And just a note is that there's 10,909 comments on this article. So it's a popular article, and the online world seem to have quite have a lot to say about it. But what we're looking at with this one is simply the headline is that these politicians are believing that they will pull through and that democracy will work out. Yet, if we scroll down, we see here that a linked article is, quote, "Ottawa police say they're ready to shut down Canada Day occupation attempts." So on one hand, we've got the politicians optimistic that democracy will live on and we will go on past these challenges. But then at the same time, the police of Ottawa are ready to shut down Canada Day, quote, "occupation attempts." And that is where I laughed when I read that, because to me, they seem a little conflicting, we can say, because what is democracy if you can't peacefully protest? And what is democracy when you're labeling people that disagree with you as racists and extremists? But sorry, a little too much of my opinion, perhaps. I'll try to be a little more controlled. But that was the One American article, because honestly, there's so much focus on America, on the United States of America, that I chose to kind of not give it so much the attention, and maybe that's my gift to everybody on July 4th. So we're going to continue on. This next 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, about 7, 8 articles are all Canadian centric. So, cheers to any Canadians out there. More than half of Canadians oppose oath of allegiance to the Queen. Yeah, happy Canada Day, right? This article came out on June 29th, so a few days before the national holiday. Most people in Canada do not think people should have to swear an oath of allegiance to the Queen, according to a poll ahead of Canada Day. Ledger poll for the Association of Canadian Studies found that 56% of respondents did not agree with swearing allegiance to the Queen. Yeah, so for those that don't live in Canada, I don't know if you knew this, but yeah, the Canadians are supposed to swear their allegiance to the Queen. We also have to have all of our laws given royal assent by the Queen before any laws can be passed. So, and new Canadians have to swear an oath to the monarchy at citizenship ceremonies, including a pledge to, quote, "be faithful and bear true allegiance to Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth II, Queen of Canada, her heirs and successors." Right. Well, just interesting to see that is what the survey brought up. Next article from the CBC. This is about one of the main cities in Canada from the province of Alberta. So the article is 10 Albertans facing 139 charges in fentanyl. Super Lab bust near Calgary, says Alert. Project Essence included largest reported isotonic isotoniazine seizure in North America. Isotoniazine seizure, which I suppose is fentanyl. But so 10 people, mostly from Edmonton and Okotoks, Alberta, are facing 139 charges after a fentanyl super lab was shut down south of Calgary last July, the Alberta Law Enforcement Response Team said in a release on Wednesday. They found 31 kilograms of fentanyl and 7,600 kilograms of the chemicals used to make a synthetic opioid that is 50 to 100 times stronger than morphine. The total street value was pegged at about 300 million. Now, there's a lot we can go into with, who are these people? How did they get the funds? How did they get the supplies? Who was behind the operation? We know that there's so much intelligence community and covert operations going on in other countries in the world. Maybe it's going on in Canada too. We'll just stay tuned and find out. I'm sure that more details will emerge from the story. Next up, on the same tangent as drugs, is that the Canadian government okays the settlement with Purdue Pharma over opioid addictions. From CTV Vancouver, posted June 29th. A proposed $150 million settlement with Purdue Pharma Canada, covering all provinces and territories, has been reached for the recovery of healthcare costs related to the sale and marketing of opioid-based pain medication. British Columbia Attorney General David Eby said Wednesday that it's the largest settlement of a government healthcare cost claim in Canadian history. So this occurred because the province launched a proposed class action lawsuit in 2018 against more than 40 drug companies on behalf of all federal, provincial, and territorial governments with the aim of recovering healthcare costs for the, quote, wrongful conduct of opioid manufacturers, distributors, and their consultants. Wow. The manufacturers, distributors, and their consultants. And this was accepted by the governments across Canada. Interesting. Very interesting. Especially as we will see more stories emerging about the boop boop and certain companies that are involved with that. Next up, we have a story about the Royal Canadian Navy relieving a Pacific Fleet I'll repeat that. The Royal Canadian Navy relieves Pacific Fleet ship commander for, quote, inappropriate conduct from June 30th. In a release Thursday night, the Navy says it has lost confidence in the judgment of Lieutenant Commander David Dallin of HMCS Regina. The Navy says it took action after an incident that recently took place on another vessel during a naval training exercise. Details of what happened were not released. And honestly, we can only speculate, but boy, can we speculate if we really want to. And I am interested to learn what, if any of our folks, audience members, are military people or know about what possibly could be reasons why a commander would be relieved of duty. Just what goes on? What is the threshold? What is tolerable? Because we also know that we'll be covering later on in future episodes about the ongoing scandals within the Canadian military. And that's a fascinating saga there. So I just wonder what is inappropriate conduct. Next up from CTV News. Soldier protesting COVID-19 mandates completes march in Ottawa ahead of Canada Day. Canadian Forces veteran James Topp arrived at the National War Memorial early Thursday evening, completing a cross-country march to protest COVID-19 vaccine mandates. Hundreds of people, some waving Canadian flags, lined Wellington Street and the National War Memorial to cheer on Topp as he completed the final leg of his March to Freedom, which began in Vancouver in February. Wow. So for me, the one question is, well, is the government going to treat him like a traitor or a hero? And here we see is that Poilievre, who is the leader of he's a Conservative Party leadership candidate, Pierre Poilievre, and People's Party of Canada leader, Maxime Bernier, greeted him, as well as hundreds of other people. So there are these two political parties that, at least on the surface, are supporting what he's doing, but it'll be interesting to see how the current actual government handles what this Canadian patriot is doing. Next up, we've got another story from BC. So remember that we just looked at the Purdue opioid case. And here we have the Crown seeking jail sentence, but open to house arrest for former British Columbia clerk of the legislature. So British Columbia is one of the most populated provinces in Canada. It's on the west coast. One of the biggest spending scandals in the history of British Columbia politics is nearing its conclusion as a court heard sentencing recommendations for the former clerk of the legislature. Crown Counsel revealed Monday that it seeks a conditional sentence, a jail sentence served at home instead of behind bars. The Crown suggested the majority of that sentence would be served under house arrest, and the rest would be under a curfew. So as we talked about too, about the Canadians not thinking that they should be serving an oath to the Queen, the court is called the Crown. Just to give you some context about Canadian systems. But very interesting that he was found guilty of breach of trust and fraud in May. Earlier this year, a Supreme Court judge ruled that James spent taxpayer dollars on personal expenses during his time as a high-ranking public official. And, honestly, this doesn't really sound that bad. This, it is a big thing for Canadian politics, but compared to what goes on in other countries, like that's not the worst you could be doing. But of course, we don't know the details, and maybe I shouldn't be giving him benefit of the doubt here. I'm certainly not. I'm just saying, if we look at other stories that we're covering, Canada's pretty tame. So here we have another one from Canada, and this is our second last one in the Canadian segment here, is that Parks Canada cancels camping event in Montreal amid criticism over unhoused people. So advocates for Montreal's homeless residents ramped up critiques of Parks Canada over the weekend, saying a series of local camping events that with the events the agency has scheduled throughout the summer set a double standard between those with financial means and those without. The events, dubbed Learn to Camp, are described as an opportunity to learn basic camping skills for the price of $108.75 per tent along the Lachine Canal in the city's west end. Now, for our audience, keep in mind $108. Just interesting that that is the number that they chose for this. And to learn to camp for $108, okay. Specifically in the city that I live in Canada, there is a tremendous homeless population. And I agree that this event should be criticized. So next, our last on the docket for Canada is that a biologist finds Behemoth Tree in North Vancouver nearly as wide as a Boeing 747 airplane cabin. The western red cedar found in Lynn Headwaters Regional Park is likely 1,000 to 2,000 years old, say experts. This is from July 2nd. Wow. Now for the visuals, look at that tree. That is beautiful. Happy to see. Trees are definitely something that are underappreciated and undervalued. Having just explored the West Coast a little bit, well, not so much the West, but some of the mountains in Alberta, I saw some beautiful trees and I was really impressed. So good to see that, hey, there's at least a story on this beautiful tree. And according to the University of BC's Big Tree Registry, which is a real thing, a tree 5.8 meters in diameter would be the fourth widest on record. Wow, cool. Of course, trees could have been bigger in ancient times, but that is a discussion for another episode. Okay, thank you for bearing with me for the Canadian segment. Now we're going back to the global content, and these are two articles back to back here about Sri Lanka. This article, Gas Lines and Scuffles, Sri Lanka Faces Humanitarian Crisis. This is from June 29th, that we hear that a citizen in Sri Lanka is totally fed up and exhausted. She says, I don't know how long we have to do this. The 47-year-old Kamila Nilanti. A few years ago, Sri Lanka's economy was growing strongly to provide jobs and financial security for most. It's now in a state of collapse dependent on aid from India and other countries as its leaders desperately try to negotiate a bailout with the International Monetary Fund. So again, we have covered the IMF, the World Bank, the financial institutions, the World Economic Forum, United Nations in fairly good depth on the Patreon side of things. We're not going to go deep into this today, but simply just for our audience. So the IMF, they're struggling to negotiate a bailout with the International Monetary Fund. There's a lot of information here, but that's what I wanted to bring to our attention, because next up, we're also looking at Sri Lanka, where from the BBC, only 9 hours ago, Sri Lanka Energy Minister warns petrol stocks about to run dry. So on Sunday, Kanchana Wijasekara said the nation only had enough petrol left for less than a day under regular demand. He also said the next petrol shipment was not due for more than 2 weeks. Wow. So, this is how soon until Canada or the United States is facing gas shortages like this. We know the prices are already as high as they've ever been. So not a great look for what could be in the near future for other parts of the world. Next up, we're going to Al Jazeera, and this is a build off of from another article that I reported on. This is from Al Jazeera, and it says Argentina's economy minister resigns. And the resignation comes amid deep splits in the ruling coalition about how to handle Argentina's mounting economic crisis. So, Argentina's economy minister, Martin Guzman, the architect of a recent debt deal with the International Monetary Fund, has resigned. Guzman's announcement on Saturday came amid deep splits in the ruling coalition about how to handle Argentina's mounting economic crisis. So keep in mind, was it not Argentina and Iran that both sent in applications to join the BRICS alliance? And here we have the economic minister of Argentina, who was the architect of the recent debt deal with the International Monetary Fund. He is now resigning. Could it be a shift in the way Argentina wants to go with who they want to deal with internationally, if they want to go with the BRICS alliance or if they want to go with the West? Interesting, eh? Yeah. On to the next one. We're going to be looking at 2 stories from the Korea Times. So the first one from the Korea Times is that the Finance Ministry and the World Bank are co-hosting Seoul Forum. So that's SEOUL, the capital of South Korea, the Seoul Forum for Developing Countries. The Ministry of Economy and Finance co-hosted a forum with the World Bank in Seoul Wednesday to discuss their cooperation on innovation and digital technology for developing countries. The ministry said the 2 sides assessed ongoing projects under the Korea World Bank Partnership Facility, a joint initiative established in May 2013 with an objective of helping developing members of the World Bank achieve inclusive and sustainable economic growth during the Innovation and Digital Entrepreneurship for Development Forum at the Grand Hyatt Seoul. So, like we have this again, where you got the big hitters in the world, and episodes of the Dose of Reality series that we did goes into great detail of looking at the World Bank, the IMF, and their involvement with world finances and all that. And yes, we will probably be doing a public side breakdown of these things, and that's why I'm kind of laying the foundation here with looking at all these articles and what's going on right now, setting ourselves up for a more in-depth look at how things, a tentacle of the global octopus, if you will. Next up, we've got the Korea Times again, and this article says that minimum wage for next year increased 5%. So representatives of Korea's unions and management have agreed to set next year's minimum hourly wage at $7.41 American, a 5% increase from this year. Okay, well, makes sense. Inflation is probably affecting everybody all around the world. And, that's just interesting. The people, regular workers, obviously are the ones that suffer the most in these global economic crisis times. So it makes sense that people have to get paid more, but is that really the solution? Well, we'll just, time will tell, but at least This indicates that the unions and management are trying to make life better for the average citizen in South Korea. Okay, so we've got a few articles here that are all in the same tangent from the business side of things. And yeah, when I saw these, these don't really get that much attention, but we'll get into them. So first one up is Bed Bath & Beyond's CEO is out as sales tumble. This is from CNN Business, June 29th. So the Bed Bath & Beyond CEO, Mark Triton, is out after only 3 years at the helm of the rapidly sinking retailer. The beleaguered company announced multiple changes to its leadership Wednesday, including replacing Triton. In the interim, Bed Bath & Beyond has tapped Sue Grove, an independent director on the company's board, as its CEO until it finds someone permanent for the position. I mean, not really a surprise that big corporations are floundering right now in this time of global economic strife. Okay, well, so the headline that I have here, that picture is a little startling to me because it's just some pictures of witches. I don't know where that came from, but we're continuing, is that the Disney CEO, Bob Chapek, gets new 3-year contract. Okay, so Bob Chapek isn't going anywhere. Disney's board of directors unanimously voted to extend Chapek's contract as CEO for another 3 years, the company said Tuesday. His new contract begins July 1st and runs until 2025. The news is notable not only because Disney is one of the biggest and best known media companies in the world, but also because the company has experienced some very public missteps since Chapek began his tenure in 2020. This led to some questions around Hollywood on whether Disney would stick with Chapek once his contract came to an end next year. But the board removed all doubts on Tuesday. So interesting. And of course, Disney Corporation is its own deep dive episode, which we're not doing here, but we will keep it in mind that they just inked their CEO to another 3 years. Next up is we've got so the last of these CNN business articles, and the article is top accounting firm fined $100 million after employee cheated on the CPA exams. So Ernst & Young has been slapped with a record $100 million fine from the US government after regulators discovered that the company knew some of its auditors were cheating on exams for several years and did nothing to stop it. The Security and Exchange Commission said Tuesday that a significant number of the accounting firm's auditors cheated on the ethics portion of the Certified Public Accountant test and other courses needed to maintain their license. Well, isn't that ironic to cheat on the ethics portion of your CPA? Interesting. This is the largest fine ever, $100 million. Here's a quote from the SEC's Enforcement Division, Gerbir Gruel. Quote, this action involves breaches of trust by gatekeepers within the gatekeeper entrusted to audit many of our nation's public companies. And he added that it's equally shocking they hindered its investigation. This action should serve as a clear message that the SEC will not tolerate integrity failures by independent auditors who choose the easier wrong over the harder right. So I will simply, I will bring up for our audience at our Patreon account, maybe you've listened to the episode of Dose of Reality where we looked into the Premier of Manitoba and her involvement as an accountant, and we were able to see the various stories about her getting fined and suspended before she became a politician. And we looked at the potential remunerations, not the potential, but the actual remunerations that she received from certain dealings before she became a prominent politician. So just keep it in mind that, wow, to me, this is very significant, actually, that it's good that they're getting fined, but in all honesty, how much is that money really going to affect any of them? It's probably just an annual bonus that they lose half of. But maybe we should have more faith in the system. I say that while trying to not be condescending. Next up, we are unfortunately hitting up the global conflict section of the stories. So if you don't really want to consume this sort of energy into your essence, into your aura, then perhaps you skip maybe about 10 minutes, because yeah, the next about 7 stories are about global conflict and unfortunate death that's going on in the world. But we should be aware of what's going on. So we have Colombia Truth Commission presents final report on the civil conflict. The commission presents final report on civil conflict, calls for sweeping changes to the country's drug policy. This is from June 29th. So Colombia's Truth Commission has presented its final report on the country's long-running civil conflict, announcing that at least 450,000 people were killed over nearly 6 decades of fighting. The long-awaited report from the Truth Commission on Tuesday said the effect of the conflict between the Colombian military and rebel groups has been, quote, massive and intolerable. It has called for substantial reforms in Colombia's approach to drug policy, which it said helped prolong the civil war, and urged redress for the victims of the conflict. Now, there's a lot to get into with this. Obviously, there's so many details, and we're not on the ground. We can only read about these stories. And I will just mention here that because this is such a significant story, I find we're going to read a little bit of this article. So based on interviews with more than 14,000 victims of the conflict, as well as military leaders and former fighters, the report gave an updated toll of the violence. In addition to the 450,000 people who were killed between 1985 and 2018, it said at least 121,768 people were also disappeared. Some 55,000 were kidnapped between 1990 and 2008, while at least 7.7 million people were displaced between 1985 and 2019. Now, the war, which is said to have started with a Marxist peasant armed uprising in 1964, extended across the country over nearly 6 decades and deteriorated in the 1990s due to drug trafficking and the rise of paramilitary factions that often worked in collusion with the military and politicians. So obviously, we have to keep in mind of the intelligence community, the influence of foreign powers, the paramilitary groups. Just reference the article that we looked at from the Intercept about how many proxy wars the United States has started and been involved with over the past few decades. So, we have no idea the depth and complexity of a situation like this, but I think it's fair to assume that there would be outside influence going on with this conflict, unfortunately. Next up, we are looking at, we're sticking with Al Jazeera. They do a fantastic job on reporting on the international situations. So more than 300,000 civilians killed in the Syrian conflict, says a UN report. The report, based on 8 sources, say some 306,000 civilians were killed in Syria between March 1st, 2011 to March 31st, 2021 due to the conflict. Now, this is horrible. We know that the innocents are the ones that suffer. When we say that these are proxy wars, it's 5-dimensional chess, geopolitics is all a game. Unfortunately, there are real casualties, there are real deaths, there's real suffering, but it's still all a game to a lot of these people behind the scenes that are pulling the strings, unfortunately. And, we're not going to get into breaking down the Syrian conflict, but it is interesting to note that, as this article says, the Syrian conflict began with anti-government protests that broke out in March 2011 in different parts of Syria, demanding democratic reforms following the Arab Spring protests in Egypt, Tunisia, Yemen, Libya, and Bahrain that removed some national leaders who had been in power for decades. The protests quickly turned into a full-blown civil war that killed hundreds of thousands and destroyed large parts of the country. So what I want to highlight here, that the leaders, after demanding, quote, democratic reform, that national leaders who had been in power for decades were removed. So keep that in mind. Just, that's all I'm saying with this. Next up, we have, again, Al Jazeera. Dozens of people dead in a Colombia prison riot. 49 people have been killed and 30 injured during attempted escape from prison in Tuluá, officials say. From June 28th, 2022, at least 49 people have died and dozens were injured in a fire during an apparent riot in a prison in the southwestern Colombian city of Tuluá, officials say. The head of the National Prisons Agency, General Tito Castellanos, said on Tuesday, authorities are investigating whether prisoners had lit their mattresses on fire as part of an escape attempt or whether the riot was provoked to cover some other situation. It was not immediately clear if all those who died were prisoners or if anyone escaped during the incident. And their guess is as good as mine, probably better than mine. I really have no idea. Fortunately, I've never been to jail. I don't know what it's like. Never been to Colombia. Never been to a Colombian jail to boot. So, you know, and who knows about what's going on. The real reason for it obviously could be gang related. Like they said, it could be covering up something. Could straight up be that they just tried to escape and they're getting creative and desperate, unfortunately. And on to the next story here. So 20 people found dead in the Libyan desert. Bodies found about 2 weeks after the group died, presumably due to thirst. The bodies of 20 people who got lost in the Libyan desert have been found, according to rescuers, who presume the group died of thirst. The bodies were discovered by a truck driver traveling through the desert and were recovered on a Tuesday about 320 kilometers southwest of Kufra and 120 kilometers from the borders with Chad. They say that the driver got lost, and we believe the group died in the desert about 14 days ago since the last call on a mobile phone there was on June 13th. The sparsely populated region regularly sees summer temperatures above 40 degrees Celsius. Above 40 degrees Celsius, which is 104 degrees Fahrenheit. Yeah, honestly, this could be, there's a lot that could be. It could really simply have been that they got lost in the desert and they unfortunately died of not having access to water. That seems totally legit, but with these stories, you never know. There could be, we're not going to speculate, but just, you know how it is at Generation Z and when these stories come out and what they're really trying to tell us with them. Next up, we have from Mexico. As the Mexican journalist shot, it marks the 12th reporter murdered this year. Violence targeting reporters in Mexico continues to rise as 47-year-old Antonio de la Cruz was shot outside his home. The Mexican journalist was shot and killed while leaving his home in Ciudad Victoria in northeastern Mexico. Yeah, so as the article says, there's been more than 150 journalists that have been killed since 2000. And obviously, when people are trying to report even just something that we're trying to do here at Generation Z, there are obviously powers that want to silence these voices. So it is important to be aware of this. It is important to talk about this. This is interesting. I'm going to check this out later. The Reporters Without Borders. They say that the Mexican president, Andrés Manuel López Obrador, had not undertaken the necessary reforms to stop the spiral of violence against the press. Whereas President Obrador had been criticized for his hostility to the press, whom he has attacked repeatedly during his tenure. Wow. Well, I wonder if he's calling it fake news or if he's actually silencing protesters, because there's a bit of a difference. But, and it also proceeds to say that 15 Mexican journalists are currently missing. That is alarming and concerning and does definitely make me grateful to live in Canada. Thank you. So thank you very much for this, freedom. And I have to recognize that I do have this sense, as critical as we want to be with the certain climate of the Canadian politics, I'm not in any sort of danger like that, knock on wood, not jinxing myself. But here we have West African leaders lift the economic sanctions on Mali. So leaders from the economic community of West African states gathered to assess efforts to secure timetables for restoring civilian rule in Mali, Guinea, and Burkina Faso. So the Economic Community of West African States, the ECOWAS. This is from July 3rd. Leaders of the Economic Community of West African States have lifted economic and financial sanctions imposed on Mali after its military rulers proposed a 24-month transition to democracy and published a new electoral law. What did we just look at with those list of countries that had their leaders removed and there was a vacuum of power left, which led to hundreds of thousands of people dying? And just, let's see if I have the articles. I don't think I actually brought it up, but some articles that I had in addition to this was giving some context about Canadian peacekeepers in Mali. And I wonder, what are they doing? What sort of peace are they keeping if the country's in a state of lawlessness from after the military, it's complicated. I'm not there on the ground. All I can do is read articles about it, but I've always been very skeptical of the Canadian government and the Canadian military's involvement as peacekeepers all around the world, and specifically in countries where other Western African states have posed sanctions on. Just wonder what's going on there behind the scenes. Right. So on to the next one, because there's a lot that we can get into with that, but I'm already going well past the general time limit for these episodes. And again, if you're still with me, thank you so much. If you're just tuning in, which I don't know why you would be tuning in halfway, but this is Riel from Generation Z. We're doing the KRAKEN. It's number 229. This is deliberately a longer segment, and thank you so much for being with us. So as we're continuing here, the United Nations says that Libya's Tarhuna could have 100 mass graves. A UN report details how Kaniat militia fighters executed and imprisoned hundreds of people between 2016 and 2020. So, the report to be submitted to the UN Human Rights Council this week details how fighters from the Kaniat militia executed and imprisoned hundreds of people between 2016 and 2020, sometimes keeping them in tiny oven-like structures called the boxes, which were set alight during interrogations. And obviously, this is very disturbing. This is we're almost this I believe is the second last story in the global conflict section of our news report today. But like I said, a lot is going on. So one thing that I wanted to bring up here is that in the surviving leaders of the Kaniat are mostly believed to have fled to areas of eastern Libya under Haftar's control. So I'll read the article from. At one stage, the Kaniat was aligned with the Tripoli-based government of National Accord, but later with the Eastern Libyan National Army, led by General Khalifa Haftar, that tried unsuccessfully to overthrow the internationally recognized National Accord administration. So we're not there, as Dave always says, where we don't have boots on the ground, we don't know what's going on, but it's just interesting that we're just looking at the articles that talk about these. And Libya is a perfect example of a country where the leader was considered a dictator to the Western world, but since that leader was removed violently, there has been arguably only more chaos in the country than there was before. So just keep in mind, when you think that you're supporting quote unquote good guys versus bad guys, what's really going on? That's all we're trying to look at with this. And the final article of this section for the KRAKEN, and thank you again for being with us, is that the UN condemns protesters who stormed Libya parliament. This is also from Al Jazeera from July 2nd. Protesters stormed parliament to demonstrate over deteriorating living conditions and political deadlock. So they've, okay. Well, a senior United Nations official for Libya has condemned the storming of the parliament's headquarters by angry demonstrators as part of protests in several cities against the economic turmoil and the political deadlock in the country. They set fire to the government buildings, including the House of Representatives in the eastern city of Tobruk. So they just say the UN representative special advisor on Libya says the people's right to peacefully protest should be respected and protected, but riots and acts of vandalism, such as the storming of the House of Representatives headquarters late yesterday in Tobruk, are totally unacceptable. Right. Well, it's really hard to say what's acceptable and what's not acceptable given the global economic situation and all the suffering in the world. I only have sympathy for the citizens of Libya, and hopefully that the situation can get resolved and the politicians can work together to actually come up with solutions. Now we're getting to we're maintaining the tangent of the global stories. However, these are not stories about conflict. These are simply interesting stories from around the world. And starting off with this segment is the Hajj booking system changes leave many Muslims disappointed. From Al Jazeera, many Muslims from Western countries miss out as Saudi Arabia's Hajj authorities move pilgrimage bookings online. Wow. Now, that's so just first off, I mean, this is one of the most sacred symbols in the Islamic religion, and I'm not going to make much comment about it on a deeper esoteric level. I don't think I built up enough of a reputation with our audience on the public side to go deep into this, but we will be exploring what the black cube represents, and I'm sure that you've heard Dave talk about it. I've got my own research going deep into this symbolism, but very interesting that, well, I'll just read the article for us all, is that they were so because of the coronavirus pandemic-led travel curbs meant Saudi Arabia was only allowing Muslims already inside the country to make the pilgrimage. In 2019, 2.5 million Muslims made the journey for Hajj before the coronavirus pandemic hit. That year, the income from both Hajj and Umrah, a shorter version of Hajj that can be completed at any time of year and is not compulsory, brought in about 12 billion to Saudi Arabia's economy. There's with overall with the pandemic, it's very interesting to consider how the coronavirus pandemic has affected world religions overall, and with the digitization of society. So it's just interesting to note that in order to attend this holy sacred pilgrimage, you have to book it online. And that's all we're going to say about this. Moving on to the next one from Al Jazeera as well. Germany and Nigeria sign accord for return of looted Benin bronzes. A British colonial expedition looted vast quantities of treasures in 1897 from the royal palace of the Kingdom of Benin. Now, if you can see the visuals of that, that's an interesting looking statue. I've never heard of the Benin bronze sculpture, but this is interesting because I've been paying attention to what's going on in Nigeria, and here's another side of what they're doing in an international sense. And Germany and Nigeria have signed an agreement that paves the way for the return of hundreds of artifacts known as the Benin bronzes that were looted and removed from Africa more than 120 years ago, an accord that Nigerian officials hope will prompt other countries to follow suit. They were stolen and basically looted in 1897 from the royal palace of the Kingdom of Benin, which is now southwestern Nigeria. Interesting. Well, I'm happy that the country was able to repatriate what honestly is from their culture. And this is just a minor example of colonialism and Germany's role in colonialism. And honestly, Germany could definitely get more flack for their role in all of it. That was before what the National Socialists did, but like in the 1890s, for example. However, continuing on, from CTV News, here we have Nigeria again. Children among 77 kept in Nigeria church for rapture, police say. So the number 77, why did they choose 77 children? Police in Nigeria have freed at least 77 people who were kept in a church basement by pastors who preached to them about Christian believers ascending to heaven with the second coming of Jesus Christ, authorities said Sunday. Wow. Like, okay. That's all. We're just bringing that to your attention here. The number 77 children kept in the Nigerian church for rapture. Next up, we are going to New Zealand, where they designate Proud Boys a terrorist organization. New Zealand's government has declared that American far-right group, the Proud Boys and the Base, are terrorist organizations. Two groups join 18 others, including the Islamic State group, that have been given an official terrorist designation, making it illegal in New Zealand to fund, recruit, or participate in the groups, and obligating authorities to take action against them. The New Zealand massacre inspired other white supremacists around the world, including a white gunman who killed 10 black people at a supermarket in Buffalo, New York in May. Wow. Okay, so this, I missed a paragraph here. It's because the US groups are not known to be active in New Zealand, although the South Pacific nation has become more tuned to threats from the far right after a white supremacist shot and killed 51 Muslim worshippers at 2 Christchurch mosques in 2019. Wow. In a 29-page explanation of the Proud Boys designation published Thursday, New Zealand authorities say the group's involvements in the violent attack on the U.S. Capitol building on January 6th amounted to an act of terrorism. Right. Well, hopefully that this stops violence without compromising too much of the average person's freedoms, and hopefully that they don't implement new laws where they can just label you an extremist or right-wing terrorist for reporting on news and criticizing your government. Hopefully, but you never know. So next up, we're going to CNN. Now, this is one of the older articles that I had since I've started to do the KRAKEN, but this I found very interesting, is that hurricane numbers are decreasing in every ocean basin except for one, study finds. Now, just and for our audience, look at this tornado, eye of the tornado, eye of the hurricane, more accurately. Looks kind of like a spiral galaxy, doesn't it? Maybe a torsion field, maybe the torus. Interesting. Of course, this is pictures taken from the quote IS International Space Station. And interesting that the study published in the journal Nature Climate Change found that the annual number of global hurricanes, typhoons, and tropical storms, or tropical cyclones, more generally declined by roughly 13% as the planet warmed during the 20th century. Scientists found that the trend in most of the world's oceans, except for the North Atlantic, where the number of storms increased. Well, sorry to the folks in the North Atlantic. Nobody likes seeing a hurricane warning anywhere. But yeah, on to the next one. We're doing a series of articles from the Jerusalem Post. And I honestly do like the stories that they're reporting on, and these will be very quick ones. Don't worry. I don't know how much longer I'll be going on, but this episode overall should probably be about 90 minutes. So we are continuing on stories specifically out of the Jerusalem Post for about the next 6. First up, wanting to give away money may be linked to early Alzheimer's disease, says study. The results of the study show that older adults who choose to give away a larger portion of the money also tended to demonstrate poorer performance on cognitive assessments. Okay, well, just take that as you will. So 67 people were selected to participate in the study. Okay, well, that's not a lot of people, but it's just interesting that they are linking with wanting to give money away with being with having Alzheimer's. Next up from the Jerusalem Post as well is that sorry, let's just while it loads. Calling Israel apartheid is plain anti-Semitic, says the VP of the European Parliament. At a conference at the Combat Anti-Semitism Movement, the WZO and the NGO Monitor, world leaders discussed the misappropriation of the term apartheid and its use against Israel. Now, obviously, this is a very controversial subject. It's a very sensitive one. I will try to tread lightly on it, but I just would like to lay it clear that to criticize the state of Israel and the regime is not to criticize the religious beliefs of any person that practices Judaism, and it is not to criticize any of the citizens of Israel. Much like Dave always says, when you're criticizing the regime of, say, Russia or the CCP of China, you're not criticizing the people, we're criticizing the political antics and the oligarchs of these situations. So as it says here, the comments were made at a conference that was co-hosted by the Combat Anti-Semitism Movement, the World Zionist Organization, and the NGO Monitor. So I would just like to say that it is very different to talk about Zionism than it is to talk about being Jewish. From my perspective, we're not going to go there. I understand if that's going to trigger some people. But, you know, it's something that we do need to talk about and have a distinct understanding of the difference between Judaism, the state of Israel as a government, and Zionism as a political movement. They're all very different things, and we'll just leave that there. So next up from the Jerusalem Post, we have Israeli billionaire's daughter under fire for paying celebrities to speak about family purity. Okay. Many female celebrities shared their experiences on social media, stating their reasons for keeping family purity while being paid to participate in the campaign. Israeli businesswoman Ruthie Levayev Yelizarov is under fire for her social media campaign, which promoted nida and family purity. Nida refers to a woman who has experienced a uterine discharge of blood and is prohibited from engaging in sexual activity during this period. Many female celebrities shared their experiences on social media and seemed to agree with Leviev Yerilazarov's campaign. Therein lies the reason for the criticism against her. As it turns out, many of these celebrities were paid to participate in the program. We're not going to go deeper into this, but you know, there's a lot that can be discussed, and this would be its own interesting political, social, political, anthropological, cultural commentary, but we're not going to do that here. I'm going to leave that article as that is, just for you to absorb and keep that in mind. Okay, so next up, we have from TV anchor to politics, who is Israel's Prime Minister Yair Lapid? Yair Lapid found fame in Israel before arriving in the Knesset with roles in a few movies, writing lyrics to some songs, and hosting a talk show. Okay, and I personally did not know this before reading this article, but as Yair Lapid may have achieved peak political success when he became prime minister at midnight on Thursday, he reached the apex of fame in Israel long before he ever ran for the Knesset, this article says. So what I wanted to highlight here is that he wrote the lyrics to 22 songs, some of which were pop hits, and he acted in a few movies. He wrote 10 books, mostly novels. Interesting. So he was also a talk show host where he interviewed prominent people such as Benjamin Netanyahu, Ariel Sharon, Dalai Lama, Bill Gates, Stephen Hawking, Arnold Schwarzenegger. And he became the anchor of Israel's most watched news program in 2008 on Channel 2. He was a part of a show famously called Where's the Money? Interesting. So that's, just keep that in mind as we also learn that Zelensky, the president of Ukraine, was also an actor on TV before he became the president of his country. Just putting that out there. Also, I hope that the lag isn't too much on this episode. If you're watching it, the sync may not be matching up. I understand. I am still working out some kinks with my own technology, and I recognize that I may have overloaded my computer with how many articles I wanted to share, but we're almost done, so it's all good. Okay, so the IDF stopped hackers from hitting US power plants, Unit 8,200 official says. Now, this is the first time a current Unit 8,200 official, Deputy Chief of IDF Unit 8,200, Colonel Yu, discussed such sensitive cyber intelligence sharing in public, where if you'll see, his face is blurred out on this article. Wow, like this is pretty deep. And it says the Deputy Chief of IDF, the Israeli Defense Forces Unit 8,200, Colonel Yu, on Wednesday said that his intelligence agency warned the United States of attempts to hack the country's power plants in time to thwart the cyber attack. This was not the first time these warnings to the US have been made public. It was the first time a Unit 8,200 official had discussed sensitive cyber intelligence in public, though. So, yeah, all I really want to mention this is, I will mention this as well, is that introducing his unit, Yu said that, quote, "We're Israel's national SIGINT and cyber unit and are a part of the defense intelligence in the IDF. Our mission is intelligence collection and combating crucial threats to Israel for the IDF and for Israel's policymakers. We are also a major player in the cyber domain and in Israel's cyber defense." So my only kind of comment to make us think more about this is this similar to the Patriot Act, where they implemented these laws and rules in America to stop terrorists, but turns out that it actually didn't stop any terrorists? I just can't help but think about that as we see something like this. But very, very interesting that he's going public for the first time. And I'm being very careful and delicate with what I say here. We're just reading the news, but SIGINT is signal intelligence, and that's only one of the many different types of intelligence gatherings from these intelligence communities. But so here it is in public, just very interesting to me. So these next two articles, we're almost done here, and thank you so much for being with me through this record-breaking Kraken, we can say, because this is definitely the longest episode that we've done, and I'm feeling great. I hope you are too. I hope this has been helping you understand more about the world, maybe asking some questions about what's really going on. But here, well, we've got two articles that are going back to back. The first one, again, from the Jerusalem Post. Was the fourth dose of Pfizer's COVID vaccine effective? Question is being answered by a study. An extensive Israeli study of 24,000 elderly recipients living in long-term care geriatric facilities found that the fourth dose saved many lives. Well, okay, good. Case closed. The fourth dose is saving lives in Israel. And end of story. Next up, we have also from the Jerusalem Post. Oh, okay. Well, that's a bit awkward. COVID-19's sixth wave begins with more seriously ill and more deaths. Now, according to the health ministry, 11,000 tested positive for the virus on Sunday, 68,000 during the past 7 days. So I grabbed these two articles because actually these were both two of the most read stories at the time on the Jerusalem Post, one after the other. First one asking if the fourth doses were effective. And the second one is talking about the sixth wave beginning with more seriously ill and more deaths from COVID killing people. And that's all. We're not going to read these. That's just all I wanted to say. And we're continuing on with our little COVID mini section here. This is from CNN. Okay, it's not necessarily COVID, but basically, you do not want this virus, says a California man with monkeypox who urges others to get vaccinated. Right. So that's basically it, is that a man who has posted a video that's been watched 250,000 times says that you do not want to get this virus. And that's pretty much all we're going to say about that, because just don't need to go there. Now let's see if these articles, okay, here it is. Yeah. So this article is from CTV News, and let's see if it'll load. My apologies. Let's do this one as well. Here we have it. So this could have been in the Canadian section, but this is going to be in the COVID section, which we are almost done. COVID-19 has crushed Canada's healthcare system, warns doctor from July 4th. The chronic staff shortages in Canada's healthcare system has been exacerbated by waves of COVID-19 infections and are pushing the system to the brink, warns a medical advocate for Doctors Manitoba. The healthcare system has been slowly been crumbling, Dr. David Cram, the president of Doctors Manitoba. Interesting. Well, last time I checked this, there was a different president of Doctors Manitoba, which I have actual extensive PowerPoint slides on. And I actually can't wait to get into the COVID stuff. But actually, if you would like, you can go to my YouTube account, Dose of Reality, where I did actually do breakdowns of some certain COVID narratives that actually are still up because they could not be labeled as misinformation, because I'm simply referencing open source mainstream news stories, and I'm just talking about the tests actually and certain other aspects of the COVID narrative that we've been told, and I'm just analyzing them. My YouTube channel isn't very big. I much prefer being here on Generation Z. I just had my own stuff on the side, but very interesting that this is what they're saying now, because the reality is that the Canadian healthcare system has been on the verge of collapsing for a very long time, for a very long time. And no, it is not only because of this viral pandemic. But so here we have an article from one of Venezuela's news outlets, and I'm going to pull up my Word document here because the article itself is in Spanish, but I have the notes, the translation in English for us. So what I want to say, so this article, first off, is from El Observador, and the article says that a judge in Uruguay orders Pfizer to provide extensive detail on the biochemical composition, including the possible presence of graphene oxide or nanotechnological elements, and evidence of efficacy and safety of its COVID jab within 48 hours. So that's what this article in Spanish shows actually, and I used Disclosed TV as the translation, but we'll see what happens with that. We'll see where it goes, because that's obviously something that we can't really talk about. But if this is a real lawsuit, well then, maybe it's actually coming to light. But so I really want to thank you for being here. And if you have made it this far, we're probably just over the hour mark, maybe a little bit longer. Honestly, I don't have a timer with me, but this is kind of our bonus Easter egg sequence of articles to end this program, this KRAKEN segment. And please, a warning, this is disturbing, arguably a little more disturbing than what we're already looking at, because this is more detailed and specific. So this article, first one up, is from March 31st, 2022. An accused killer says he was trying to protect children from viper-like shadow creature. His quote is, "It was a shadow creature with no skin, no eyes. It kept throwing me in a circle." The Fort Saskatchewan father, who admits to killing his infant son, now says he thought he was being attacked by a shadow creature while he was in a dreamlike state. Damien Starrett, 33, is charged with second-degree murder in the death of his 1-year-old son, Aries Starrett. Starrett's lawyer wants Court of Queen's Bench Justice John Henderson to find Starrett not criminally responsible. On Thursday morning, he told Crown prosecutor that 1 week before Aries died, he had a bizarre experience. He went upstairs to his bedroom to retrieve a laptop and fell asleep on the bed. He dreamed he was smoking a cigarette while he was walking through a city he'd never seen before. He said that when he woke up, he was lying down on the bed with a lit cigarette in his hand. He quickly put the cigarette out and tried to get rid of the smell because he was adamantly against smoking inside the house. I didn't tell anybody because I was so confused. He said the night before he killed his son, he brought 12 Percocet tablets from a friend. He took 4 right away, then another 2 before his wife returned home from work around 9 p.m. He had problems falling asleep that night and remembered last checking the time on his phone at 3:30 a.m., he testified. The next morning was Saturday, and Starrett was the last one to get up. He told the court his back pain was excruciating, so he took 2 more Percocets. He testified that it gave him some relief, but he popped another 2 tablets around noon, then another 2 at 2 p.m. 2, 2, 2, 12, 2. Okay. And so this article, yeah, very disturbing. And he added more detail to his story. During cross-examination, he said that during his dreamlike state, he felt like he was being overtaken by violence and forced by a creature that was as black as viper. It was a shadow creature with no skin and no eyes. It kept throwing me in a circle. All I remember is spinning. He said that he felt like he was getting thrown around the room in his altered state. Right. So what I want to also look at is the tattoo of this man named Damien Starrett. And the name Damien, I believe it's from some of the Exorcist movies and even older religious stuff, perhaps being something about spawn of Satan in these myths, in these stories. And here we have this tattoo on his chest, the double-headed eagle, which was the same emblem that was on the flag that we looked at on the story about Russian oligarchs. Keep in mind, his name is Starrett, his kid's name is Aries, and his name is Damien. And he was at the age of 33. So the next article from March 29th, 2020, Fort Saskatchewan father says he was teleported during fatal attack on infant son. Warning, details in this story are graphic and disturbing. So we already looked at that same, so the same man, he going on to tell the story is that all I can remember is going from light to darkness, and I'm looking at the stairwell, and it's like I got teleported in time. It's dark, I stood up, I'm confused about what's going on. Oh, and I'm so sorry that we're talking about this because it is very disturbing. I'm not going to read out to you the rest of it, but basically, yeah, we're just bringing that to our attention, especially because from the interviews that Generations had with Ross Coulthart emphasized the reportings of shadow people in military bases. Now, what is going on there? What is going on here? Now, here's the follow-up to this story, and this is the last story that we're going through today. Again, just so thank you. So grateful to have this platform. I love doing this. Hopefully y'all are enjoying it. The last article for today, Fort Saskatchewan father found guilty of manslaughter in death of infant son. So Damien Starrett was also convicted of assault in the attack of his daughter. And the ruling ended up being that they didn't accept his statement that he was unaware of what was happening at the time of the assaults. Now, this is a very disturbing one. Here we have another picture of him with that same chest tattoo. So, there's a lot of speculation, like what could really be going on, what's with demonic entities, with possessions, with the astral plane, with the veil lifting, with all these topics that Dave has done such an incredible job researching on the public side of things and on the private side, on the Generation Z Patreon account. But there we have it for today. And let me just exit my screen. So, okay, thank you so much. Again, this was our KRAKEN for July 4th. Hopefully it'll be up tonight. If not, it'll be up on July 5th. And thank you very much, everybody, for joining us. And see you all again very, very soon.